Down. Hello, welcome to 1-7 Design Hangout number 2. We're going to talk about role-playing games, role-playing game design, whiskey, and whatever else comes to mind. Tonight I'm joined once again by Jonathan Walton, and we have a surprise guest. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves real quick.
I guess I'll go first. But I was on the previous Hangout. I'm Jonathan Walton. I'm a PhD student in San Diego, studying communication in a department that's very focused on theory as well as practice of communication. And game-wise, I'm probably most well known for the Planar Codex, which is a Dungeon World supplement. But I've done a lot of small games and was responsible for Game Chef for a little bit. So anyway, been involved in indie games for a long time, and really excited about talking with John like we used to in Seattle about game design stuff. So.
All right, I guess I'll go next. Hi, my name is Strash Atimovic. I'm currently living in Boulder, Colorado. I am actually just a programmer by trade. I don't know what I would actually be best known by. My first official piece coming out is should be sometime early next year, called Atlas Reckoning. It involves giant robots. But I work with a lot of designers on their games. I do a lot of playtesting, and I don't know, I write stuff about games. So I guess that's a thing.
Yeah, actually, Strash has like my favorite title in indie gaming right now. Is this a spoiler? I don't know.
No, totally not a spoiler. Bring it on.
Consulting designer, which I really love. Like the way Sherlock Holmes is a consulting detective. He's a consulting game designer, and has been helping me a lot with Blades in the Dark, and a lot of other people too. But I'm trying to monopolize his time as much as possible. But I'm a big fan of that title. Consulting designer is very cool. So let's chat. I think just before we started the broadcast, Jonathan asked me what I was playing right now, so I think that's a good place to start to talk about what we're actually doing and the groups we're in and games we're playing. So I'll do a real fast rundown of that. I have 3 groups, but right now one of them is kind of on hiatus. That group is playing Apocalypse World Dark Age playtest. I think it's the second version, and we haven't upgraded to the new version of the playtest yet. We're kind of doing our own thing with it anyway, so that one's going really well. We've got a dragon herald that's trying to stop the apocalypse, and it's really cool. Thursdays, I'm still running Blades in the Dark playtests, specifically the Razors variant, which is like a near future blend of Shadowrun and Stalker and Rainbow Six kind of stuff. And then the work group has been playing board games a lot. We just played a really cool 3M game called Regatta from, I don't even know, it's 1970 or something. Really cool racing game. Very
with
simple.
The little boats and catching wind and doing the angles.
Yes, that's the one.
Classic.
There's a newer version called Regatta, which is like a kid's game. Totally different mechanics and stuff. This is the old one, but it's very simple. It reminds me. It's a little bit like Formula D, but rather than having a gear die to move, you have a wind die, sort of. But that applies to everyone at once. So, and everyone moves their boats at once. So you have this really wonderful chaos of, we all take 3 moves now, and you couldn't plan that ahead of time, so you get bottled up, and you can cut each other's wind off, and it's super simple mechanic, and it has a really interesting strategic space that is very easy to get, and then after 5 or 6 games, you're still discovering like cool new plans and things. So I'm a big fan of it. It was surprising how fun it was. Really, really good game. But hopefully we'll get back to Dark Age this week. We've been on hiatus for like a month or so. So I think we're back this week. What are you playing, Strash?
So, for those that know me, you guys know that I kind of shifted from East Coast to West Coast. So, moving to Boulder kind of upset my whole schedule. I was having about like three separate groups as well, and we were doing a whole bunch of games. But since I moved about 2 months ago, I've been able to reconstitute a group. We're playing Urban Shadows every other Saturday, so that's a thing that's going on. I'm actually starting another Blaze in the Dark group, pretty much straight steampunk dark fantasy stuff that is stock for it. That's going to be running Wednesday nights, and I'm looking forward to that a lot. And we get together Mondays to do just like stuff that people haven't played and they either want to bring or they want to try out. So most recently we've been doing in sequence, well, not exactly in sequence, but we've been doing a run of the Sundered Lands games because apparently a lot of people have heard of it, but most of the people here haven't played it. So we've just been doing like one-shots of those, kind of working through, keeping some characters, trading some others. It's been pretty cool. In other news, I just came back from New Mexico, which was awesome. That's also why my voice is a little gone. And actually, I'm pretty excited. There's probably going to be a by-the-book game happening here. For those that don't know, it's a game that's played in pairs. It's been written over the course of the last year by Mark Diaz-Truman. And the idea is that you're playing pairs of cops. So it's a little bit like Gotham. You're playing in a city that has a mask who's a vigilante, and you're playing cops that actually want to make a difference. So you're trying to close cases and not just pass them off, to this vigilante who's always going to solve them, but it's also going to increase like the people's distrust in the police department. So it's really intense. It's super fun, and I'm actually really looking forward to that one too.
Oh man, I am so excited about that game. I can't wait. Oh, yeah.
So my turn, I guess.
Yeah, bring it on.
So, like Strauss, I got very dislocated when I moved to San Diego. I got kind of cut free of all the groups in Seattle that I was normally playing with. So I've been kind of going to meetups here, just trying to kind of get my foot in the door with different communities. First week played Urban Shadows, which is Apocalypse World hack for kind of World of Darknessy stuff. So that was pretty fun. And then last week I brought Sundered Lands, so maybe we can talk about Sundered Land. So got to play that. I guess this wasn't last week; it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. The groups here mostly meet like twice a month, I guess, instead of every week. So it's a little bit more spread out, I guess, than some of the weekly groups I'm used to from Boston and Seattle. So that's been good. I'm still trying to get a feel for people, and maybe eventually start a home game or something else. But right now, I'm just kind of getting my feel for people. But it's been a good crowd. Chris Cerniak's been out here running indie games for a long time, so there's a lot of stuff happening. Just got to figure out how to plug into it.
Cool. Yeah, we should probably talk about Sundered Land. That's a favorite topic of ours. I should say real quick to people watching, the Q&A app is on, so you can ask questions by clicking on the Q&A button, I guess. I'm not sure how that works exactly. I'll be watching the chat too in case that stuff comes in that way, but feel free to throw questions at us if you want to do that. So, Strauss, when you played Sundered Land at New Mexico?
No, actually, we do a Monday nights thing.
Oh, right, you said that. Sorry.
Yeah, my friend, actually, it came from a discussion. My friend Kit and a lady that's working on some really cool PhD stuff in linguistics got together, and they were actually talking about a game, and Kit suggested that Sundered Lands might be appropriate for that sort of idea. And so they started a Monday nights hangout. And so, yeah, we've been just going through, all of us have tried, playing it online with the Doom Pilgrim variant. And so we've just been going through and, we'll do, Caravan Guards, and then we did, the Night Watch and so on. So, yeah, we're just going through and, trying different ones. We're doing, a little Monday night random game thing. And so, people bring whatever they want, but that's been our jam.
Cool. Yeah, that's kind of how we played it, too. It was very... well, I don't know exactly how you're doing it, but we sort of did let's play one. It's the Dread Pirate Roberts RPG, right? Let's play one and then we'll probably stop, and then who knows? Maybe it'll take the whole session, or maybe it'll take 5 minutes. We don't know. We play it and then okay, that was really awesome. Do you want to play the next one? Yes. Okay, which one should we play? Well, what if our caravan guards make it to the city? So we'll do the city now, or let's do a flashback because your guy was a soldier. Let's do the soldier one. And it's very it's kind of driven by what we just played, but there's also a little bit of a writer's room vibe to it where we're like having a conversation about what game to play next and mixing and matching, and it's like super fluid, I guess.
Yeah, it's almost exactly the same for us. We're playing like a kind of a mythic Silk Road. So we had actually a caravan filled with white tea, very, very precious tea, and we were working our way through the desert. We were going to, I can't remember, I think it was Katagar. And so, in any case, yeah, it was all filled with very kind of surreal stuff and like cool fantasy elements and things like that. But yeah, we did exactly the same thing. Like we'd sit down, we'd be like, so, did we make it to the city? Did we turn around? You know, like, are we going to play in the city next, or do we want to tell stories in the fire on the way? And so, yeah, very similar.
Cool.
Yeah, it was interesting to me playing it. We just kind of played through Kerrigan Vanguard's Night Watch, and then at Ends, which is the city one, sort of just to kind of try out the different ones. So we hadn't really get a chance to do the sort of mixing and matching thing. But it seems it's easy to see how that works, right? That there's sort of plot points where you can plug in, or you can say, like John said, let's look and see what happened to this person in this one situation. Let's explore that for a little bit. And some of the triggers are really specific, like the necromancer one or whatever, that you kind of have to. Yeah. It's harder to think like how are you going to trigger that unless you've either specifically set it up or you're like, hey, let's explore this crazy ritual thing that is on this card, right?
We got lucky in our first game. One of the characters made somebody who would essentially be like a necromancer, and he was talking about how his mentor, the person that he was learning from, was terrible, and so for us it had a little bit of an easier end.
Yeah, we actually had the similar thing where one of the characters, without trying to load that particular game, they're just in character. They headed in that direction, and then at the end of that, I think we were playing in the city. At the end of that, we were like, "Oh wait, we're totally ready for the necromancer thing by accident." That was really cool to discover, and it did kind of make me want a little bit bigger set. And I know a bunch of people are working on add-ons to Sundered. I don't think any of them are actually out yet, but it would be cool to have maybe 3 or 4 extra ones to have even more places to accidentally fall into. Just naturally in play. That'd be cool.
There's 2 elements. One is Caravan Guards actually has a couple of prompts that can end up going in that direction. So even if you're not planning, I can see easily how groups can sort of head that way. The other thing is I'm actually kind of shocked. Like Sundered Lands came out, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, this is trim and great. And it's like having different rules for like the different scenes that you want to play out, potentially even in a ongoing story. And then I got to the last page and it's like, oh, and this is how you make more of them. This is great. And then I didn't see a bunch of them explode, and I was actually kind of confused. So this is actually kind of cool. It's good to get that opportunity to play.
Yeah, I think the lack of play might be part of that. I feel like it's not getting tons and tons of play. Doomed Pilgrim gets a lot of play, or some play. But yeah, Jonathan and I both, when it was first coming out, or like right before it came out, we were like all just, this is going to be huge, man. This is going to explode. It's going to be crazy. And it just didn't really happen. Again, like Jonathan was saying, I think last time we talked, it was about marketing and how, Vincent sort of decides which things get the full press marketing treatment and which things don't, and blah blah blah. But yeah, it's so, especially that last page. It just I want to like cast it in bronze and build a monument to it or something. I want everyone to know about that. It's so awesome.
Right, because it's secretly this page about how to design games, period, right? Yeah.
It kills me. Every time I look at that, I just, it's so good.
It's so flexible, it's got some great advice, and yeah, like I said, I'm really kind of shocked that we haven't heard more about it. Like, a lot of people do a lot of discussions on theory crafting, but this just hasn't really been quoted all that much, and it's, I don't know. I don't know who decides what becomes popular and what doesn't. As you said, maybe like Vincent does a little bit, but you'd expect, fans to sort of carry the torch or do whatever. And so, yeah, this kind of disappeared real quiet, and I was very puzzled.
It was interesting, too, because the same thing kind of happened with Murderous Ghosts, right? I mean, it's a pretty cool little compact format that I was expecting to see more direct riffing on, I guess, than we've seen in the past couple of years. So I'm not sure what it is about that. I mean, I think Sunderland in some ways way more accessible. Murderous Ghost is a pretty significant design challenge to tackle if you're going to make a variant on it. Even though there's a lot of work that's already done there, core loops and everything else. You can kind of build on that kind of stuff. But Sunderland in particular, it seems asking for people to make another game, right? It seems like we should have a contest anthology or something and get dozens of people to make extra games or something.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, that might be the way to do it. That might push me to finish mine. I think I only need to write like another couple hundred words probably on it. I don't know why I just stalled out. But.
Yeah, I was going to write a couple about like some of the themes that I think are underrepresented, like family and relationships and like tradition, sort of more the social side of things. But yeah, we can make
bonds.
Yeah. I went the other way and did the like missing, what I thought was the missing part of Caravan Guards, the like who goes out and establishes new routes with new other cultures and other vendors of goods and stuff, explorers of the unknown or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm afraid I don't have one of my own to throw in there, but what I will say that I have used that advice a lot in thinking about games and whenever I'm writing games otherwise. But yeah, I guess I should start one too here. Maybe get the seeds of a thing going.
Yeah, this can be a thing we're starting right now. Everyone cool is doing a Sunderland edition, you know. You gotta have one.
Yeah, I mean, all we gotta do is have a sort of publicly available InDesign template or something, right? And then just,
yeah.
That wouldn't hurt.
Okay. Anyway, so we solved that problem.
Yeah. Good. That's one down. Before I forget, last time we ended by talking about new projects, and I went on and on and on about something or other, and then didn't give you a chance to really talk, Jonathan. So I think this time maybe we could start with that and
Sure.
talk about some of the stuff you've been working on. And
well, it's a good segue from Sunderland too, actually, because the last game I worked on is very directly inspired by it in a lot of different ways. So the game I worked on for the Golden Cobra freeform game project, and actually ended up writing in like 48 hours on a weekend, is this game called Restless. Which the idea of it came when I had this weird series of dreams where I was being like chased by something weird, which, you know, that's a pretty normal weird dream, right? So I was thinking about that and thinking about some of the horror books I'd read recently that I really liked, like The Road and these other books, The Passage and The 12. And so I was thinking about, I had a conversation with Jason Morningstar and Marshall Miller like 4 months ago or something. We were talking about Apocalypse World and how to get audiences plugged into it that might not normally try it out in a sort of smaller format. And so we were talking about Sunderland and whether you could have a sort of like card-driven Apocalypse World hack where you sort of like encountered a situation and made a move and then drew another card and you had a new situation with a move on it. So basically, you know, each card is a different kind of mini situation. And I was like, yeah, totally, you could do that. And here's a zombie apocalypse one. You know, you're in a makeshift shelter, and then you roll to see if the zombies come and get you, and blah blah. Maybe people have like sex in the shelter and like open everybody else up to danger because that's what happens in horror movies, right? So I was thinking about that kind of thing. So I was thinking about that concept, and so what I came up with is basically that. It's a series of cards in a deck, and each card is a situation that you encounter, and you can kind of encounter them in any order. And at the end of each card, some people in the group get killed, and so they either play new characters in the next card, kind of like you would in Sunderland if your guy in the arena gets killed or whatever, or you can take a kind of quasi GM role where you're kind of playing the environment and the bad guys that are chasing you throughout this sort of post-apocalyptic landscape. So I was really proud of it, actually, in that it did a lot of things that I wanted to do. The cards are all freeform, actually. I got rid of the sort of Apocalypse World rules that I was originally thinking about. But the situations are still really potent, and there's definitely kind of key areas of decision-making, which is one of the things I wanted to preserve. One of the first cards is you're kind of out of supplies and there's a gas station. And the first thing that happens is you go around and all the players say, what do you not have anymore that you might find in a gas station? And so then the group splits up. You're like, who's going to go into the gas station? Who's going to stay out here and keep watch? And then you go into the gas station and you find whatever you're going to find. And the group outside sees the restless, the people who are chasing you coming. And they can decide, do they alert people inside? Do they run off and save their skins? And then the idea is kind of that the people playing the restless kind of use the fictional positioning that's been established in the scene to decide who dies, right? So if you're like, well, I'm armed with a shotgun and I'm going to shoot them, they might be like, okay, well, maybe he gets away, maybe he doesn't. If I'm the injured one who's driving across the floor, maybe you're the one who gets got. Or if you're stuck in the bathroom of the gas station while everybody else is fleeing, you're probably going to get eaten, right? So there's these places of judgment and places of choice. So the fictional things that you do still matters, and the choices that the people make on who gets killed are sometimes arbitrary. Sometimes they make choices that don't align with the fiction, right? You're the one who's going to die. That's how it goes. And I think in horror that's kind of the way it goes too. It's not always the person you expect, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, so it was very inspired by Sunderland in that the different situations are not connected in a very clear narrative way, right? They're sort of like vignettes from this apocalyptic wasteland that you're wandering through, where sometimes the same characters are involved, sometimes they're completely different characters. There's one card where at the end of the card everybody gets killed or assimilated, so there's no record of what happened to you on that card, which is pretty fun. Nice. And there's a couple of cards where there's one card about dreams. If you're the person who chooses to take watch first, you end up getting killed. But you don't know that when you're starting the card, right? You find that out at the end. So there's some interesting things in there about that sort of mess with your expectations about what's going to happen. So anyway, it was pretty fun. It was a fun little exercise. Definitely inspired by Vincent and horror stuff, and also by Graypon's card game that he's working on called Mistwood, which is sort of exploring a dark forest kind of thing, and it's also sort of card based. So anyway, that's the most recent design project I've got. So.
I'm really excited about this project. Since you first posted about it, it's kind of I don't know. To me, it feels like a culmination of a lot of things that you've been working on and off for a long time, and it's especially cool that you got there kind of following this thread through Sunderland and Apocalypse World, and then were able to jettison that and land in this place that you've started from before. That kind of like I don't know the exact correct jargon, but freeform, for lack of a better term. Because it totally works for the game. Like it's a really good fit, and I think this is something we talked about last time about how all those abandoned projects, leave you with all these tools, and it's like Minecraft. Like you've mined a lot, and you end up with a bunch of stuff that you don't know what to do with all the time, but it's there when you need it. And Restless really feels like the way Restless Resolution works. It feels like stuff you've spent a lot of time mining that you were able to like find a place, a home for.
Yeah, it's totally true. And I mean, the fact that I wrote it in a weekend is like a testament to that, right? Like I didn't write it in a weekend because it was an easy game to write, right? I wrote it in a weekend because I'd spent 10 years preparing to write that game, right? Which feels good. It feels like a culmination of a lot of different, like you said, a lot of different threads that I've been working on, from sort of crafting rules text in a sort of poetic style that uses just the amount of words that you need and leaves a lot of space for players, to the freeform stuff, to the Apocalypse World stuff, to the sort of Sunderland non-traditional narrative, sort of post-structuralist sort of thing where you have the different pieces kind of jumbled together. Yeah, all that stuff. So.
Yeah, and each piece is very immediate. Like they're not just well, to contrast it with another game that I love, which is totally different, like Primetime Adventures does scenes and rising and falling action and episode arcs, and
Yep.
it does that kind of structured narrative, but it's very play to discover it, and like you kind of like go in the moment, and you sort of know, okay, next episode is my spotlight, but how we get there is very vague, and what we do next scene isn't necessarily totally obvious to everyone, and
Yep.
it requires a high level of skill, I think, to be successful. And Restless really breaks it down to the essence of that structure. Like each of these scenes is something you might find in this horror movie, but they're all they're all very immediate problems and situations, with almost no interstitial stuff, no real setup per se. I don't know. It feels very electric. Like we're gonna draw a new card if we decide to keep playing, which is another interesting mechanic. When when you draw a card, like it's kind of on, and something, one or two people are about to die for one thing.
Yeah, every card. Somebody
Every card has at least one death, right, on every card.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like stripped down. It's all of the cool scene framey, scene play stuff in a lot of cool games that's just stripped down to its bare essence, and in a really good way. Like you can see how it works with Restless.
I hope. Yeah, I'm excited to play it too. Actually, I haven't played it yet. This is the one weakness of it. I wish I could talk more intelligently about it. But I think one of the things I really want to try to do with it is, I mean, it's very story now in the sort of non-jargony version of that term, right? Mm-hmm. You show up, play this thing, and there's no avoiding it, right? This is the situation you're in. It's awful. Make these choices off this list. It'll be a potent scene because of the things we're dealing with are big issues, right? I hope that's how it works. So I guess we'll find out. So.
It's got a really strong pick up and play thing to it too. I've been seeing a lot of those coming out from actually your guys' sort of West Coast neck of the woods, and it's actually kind of pretty cool that when you say it's stripped down, it's not just stripped down. It's stripped down to the point where anyone can pick it up. Like it could be just sitting on a table and you can get ready and go. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, plain language is really important to me too. That was another thing I really tried to get right. Writing the rules text in just normal everyday English, right? Where you can hand it to somebody and they say, okay, now you have to choose this thing, right? And it's not like some weird jargony term. It's not mechanically complicated. I mean, this is one of the good things that's interesting about freeform design these days is you can just tell people explicitly what to do, right? Which is pretty neat, right? Especially if you don't, if the rules aren't complex, there's no barrier to learning them, right? All you have to do is procedural stuff, right? You have to remember the order of operations, basically, which can be really complicated or not, right? But
you broke it down to everything fits on a single card, and even though there's a lot of cards, you can actually just play it just one step at a time, right? It's the the lights on a car showing just a segment of road, and you can get all the way to the end just by seeing one piece at a time.
Right. No, and that's the Sunderland lesson, right? All you need is a move and a situation and a little bit of character concept, right? And anybody can do that, right? Which is pretty cool. It's definitely sort of building on the established traditions of micro games, right? Which I think are pretty solid now, right? Games you can play in an hour, and both Sunderland and Restless are sort of modeled on being a series of these short games you can play in 30 minutes or an hour, right? And it also makes them flexible. Like I'm already thinking about, how do you write expansions, right? Well, you make 6 cards that are kind of vaguely about a theme, and you just shuffle them into the deck, right? And now you have, all these new situations. You find an outpost on a mountain. You find, whatever else, and you can just watch horror movies and be like, oh, that's cool. That's a cool situation. You can turn that into a card, right? It's pretty. It felt like it wrote itself in a lot of ways, right? Because you just have to think about my favorite situations from a lot of different horror movies and games. Everything from Event Horizon to The Road, right? And figure out how that one scene really worked, and then tell people how to do it, basically. So that was cool.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think it has a lot of potential outside of the horror genre too. I can really see it working for a lot of different things. I was really struck by like a superhero-y kind of idea today. Trying to think about like how that structure of horror and the structure of punching bad guys kind of is somewhat similar. That like people getting what they deserve and like how you judge the outcome of a scene
Yeah.
based on your kind of understood genre tropes.
Yeah.
You know, the villain gets away and the hero has to dig deep to reveal his inner power or whatever. Like, I don't know. I haven't quite got my mind around it yet, but the fact that Restless is so bare bones. We talked about this before too. That you know, sort of the more minimal something is, the more attractive it is to hacking, and this is a great example of something that you see it, you can see exactly how it works, you can see what it's doing because there's only one card of stuff. It's not like you have to scratch your head and like, man, how does this do it? So yeah, it makes it super exciting to go, well, I could write one of those for a superhero thing and see if it's any good.
Right, you do the Death of Gwen Stacy, right? That's pretty, like you do some classic superhero moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's girlfriend gets fridged. You know, you have to use your powers beyond their normal capabilities. You know, there's lots of moments like that where you could isolate. You know, I mean, whether you want to have a girlfriend fridging card or not, I mean, that's a totally different question.
I could do without that one.
Yeah, maybe you avoid that one. But, you know, there, like you said, there are sort of classic comic moments where you could capture it. And I think if you make them concrete, if you don't just make it, well, make up a superhero and then, like, make up a bad guy and then they're having a fight. Like, you know, you want to have it, you want to give the player something to work with, right? So
yeah, exactly. Which is why it's so, again, it's great to have that to work from, because you can see, like, how you broke down the zombie movie into this set of things, and none of them are out of left field. You don't look at them and go, why is this in here? But at the same time, they're not necessarily the ones everyone would pick or obvious ones per se. They're just correct. They're right. They're not exhaustive, and they're not cliche exactly.
right, and they don't need to be exhaustive. That's the thing that's cool about Sunderland too, right? Like you can imagine all these other situations you might be in a Sunderland game, but those aren't the ones that games are about, right? So you don't play them or you write custom games to play those things, right?
Yeah, in a bigger picture way too, it might be useful if someone isn't making microgames, it might be useful to think about your game project and, you know, am I serving? Can I think of my 6 like core loops or core moments or experiences that this game is about? And am I serving them? Is my larger game project like serving those things? Am I missing one, or should I pare it back or whatever? That might be an interesting way to look at taking Restless as a whole as like a bigger thing, and thinking of a larger game project in terms of its bite-size interactions.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it doesn't design easier if you can break it down into smaller bites, right? Instead of having to try to do this whole thing all at once, especially if it's complex.
Yeah, are each of those things fun or necessary or supported or not supported or whatever?
It's actually kind of interesting because back in the day, everything had microsystems, right? Like when I first started playing games, there were subsystems for everything. And then we decided that, you know, there needs to be the core mechanic in a game is about one thing. And then so, like, everybody started paring down to the point where you would only have like this like single mechanism, and now we're going back to divvying it up and sort of like re-examining everything in terms of a dozen subsystems and trying to perfect each one individually. So it's kind of cool.
Absolutely. I think the real lesson there is that whenever you get into a one true way mindset, you're in trouble. You're always going to come out of that thinking, man, why did I think that? Like, that's clearly there's a lot of tools in the toolbox, and but yeah, it's weird how it goes through those phases where everything has to go. Nah, forget it. The 90s design is we have to sweep the decks. We're starting from scratch. None of that stuff is all garbage. Blah. It's so dumb, but that's just how people work, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the cool thing about modular design too is it means you kind of get both, right? You can have all these subsystems, but you don't have to worry about them unless you're engaging with them, right? It's like a little bit like how people teach Burning Wheel, right? Where you have the Duel of Wits, or you have firefights in Burning Empires or whatever, right? You want to you don't have to engage with the whole system all at once, right? You can start with just the core mechanic and then sort of add on subsystems, right? And this is kind of approaching it in a similar way. There's just no core mechanic, right? It's all subsystems that you sort of engage one at a time as appropriate, which is a little bit like how Apocalypse World moves work, right? You engage them when they're fictionally triggered, and the sort of Sunderland model is more like they're just less coherent together and part of the same narrative, right? They're just broke up into separate short stories where you have a move in each story, and then you move on to the next one.
I think the challenge then becomes seeing if you can integrate them, because while standalone, they're kind of awesome. It's a question of whether you ever want to bridge between them. So, and I don't think there's a one answer there either. I think some might work better than others.
Yeah, and the bridge in Sunderland is the characters, right? Like sometimes the characters are the same between stories and sometimes they're not, which is kind of what I did in Restless too. But there'd be definitely other ways to do it, where you'd have themes or plots or artifacts or other things that would bridge the stories.
So, I guess I'll pitch my game bit here if I'm allowed. So I was working on Atlas Reckoning. There's actually 2 of these, and I did a very similar thing, right? So just a quick overview. Atlas Reckoning is a Pacific Rim-like game where you have pilots in giant robots fighting giant monsters, right? That's pretty awesome. But one of the things that's important here... Huh?
There's a giant monster right behind.
Oh, yeah, I know. Actually, I don't know if you've noticed, but my screen's been shaking because he's been headbutting it, trying to get me to pay attention. So, this is Nemo. So anyway, in Atlas Reckoning, right, there's actually 2 different types of scenes, like 2 entirely different types of story that you kind of want to tell, even though they're interrelated in some ways. So obviously there is the high action, big fight against the monster, right? And it's dramatic and there's all sorts of stuff at stake. But there's also the important, very important down tempo, right? So you can't just have all upbeats, otherwise it just feels kind of like empty, right? So you need to have the upbeats and the downbeats. And the downbeats is sort of your life in dealing with the pressures of having, the weight of the world on your shoulder and maybe not always succeeding, right? And so stress scenes that people have. And so the way that I interlinked it, obviously the characters, they cross between each of the scene types. But also I created this kind of currency. So there's stress. And so when you're fighting fighting monsters, you can generate stress as you can sort of push yourself past your limits, sort of accrue these problems. And then you have to kind of blow off steam and do things that sort of depressurize you or give you reasons to fight. And that relieves stress for you. So it's this backwards and forwards where the stress mechanic sort of bridges the 2 and sort of pulls everything together. So
yeah, of course I'm an old school Bliss Stage fan, so I love that breakdown, particularly about sort of using the stress of combat to sort of create or make you deal with problems in your personal life. I think that's pretty classic and awesome.
Yeah. That's cool. Is this an Apocalypse World derived game, Strauss? I haven't seen the mechanics or anything.
I can send them to you, but not really. You know what? I'm gonna say no. But you're gonna see a lot of AW style stuff that you might recognize. What's actually super cool about our community in general is less about this. When you make an AW hack, there's going to be a lot of discussion about what is AW, what is, the specific details about how we form moves, what's a healthy way to do certain things, and kind of how to innovate. But what I think is actually really interesting is that our lingo and vocabulary has changed, right? So, I have, once upon a time, they were called classes, and then I call them archetypes, but when I put them on the table, everyone's like, oh, playbooks, and I was like, yeah, they're kind of like playbooks, right? And I was like, so you have these like combat skills, and they're like, oh, those are moves, and I'm like, well, no, because they're not fiction triggered, but I mean, yeah, I guess you can call them moves, that's cool. So like it's I've even catch myself saying that a lot because it's just an easy way to relate to people, right? Like if you're like, hey, so have you seen X? Well, then it's like X, and everyone's like, oh, okay, I totally get that. So yeah, I wouldn't call it AW because there's no 6 to 9 band. The game is actually played with cards. I mean, like obviously, try and point, have design with intent, all that good stuff, but yeah, I don't know that I would call it an AW hack of any sort. Like, there's no, well, for one thing, the monsters are actually mechanized. There's no GM components. There's no, like, hard moves. There's no interrelation like that. Like, a lot of it, as a matter of fact, I wrote it specifically to be played GM-less, but I usually run it GM'd just because, I'm the only person that knows the rules, so, like, I set everything up.
So are the monster moves, like, mechanically triggered?
Yeah, actually they are. You actually make your monster by like picking a bunch of stuff, and then they have a mechanism, and they just have you play with one card deck per atlas, and then one for the monsters, right? So if you're playing 2-player, you guys are piloting an atlas together, and then there's the behemoth is across from you, and they're mechanized, right? So like they have things they do, and they actually advance towards one of the first things you do is you fill out this like questionnaire, and you like go through it. And so, like, they advance towards the city, and they try and, like, destroy it, and you're pretty much the only thing standing in their way. So yeah, it's what it is. I don't know that I'd call it an AW hack, but I think a lot of people would relate to it pretty easily through that kind of format. Yeah, my favorite part of it is that it's actually a sit down and play. Since we were talking about that, you don't actually need to know a lot about your character at all. You answer one question, you pick like a name and a country of origin, right? And then you and your partner design your atlas together, and you're good to go, right? So like it's literally like super fast to go. But what's really interesting is as you kind of take on these stresses, and as you sort of like, it's got this thing called sync, where the two of you kind of like merge when you're piloting your big robot. And so like you ask each other questions. They're really freaking like pointed emotional questions about like secrets you're hiding from everyone and shit like that somebody in your head would know. And so you start out with this blank slate that even you like. A lot of people have like an idea, but then this question comes and you make up something, and then the next time they get a question, they ask something related to it. And we've gotten these really kind of like powerful, messed up, just like awesome characters with a lot of like deep-seated issues that are scared of themselves and scared of their responsibilities, but put it up a front, and it's just a real delight to watch because a lot of people I find play it because they think they want to punch monsters, but my favorite thing about the game is that that stuff happens and it's awesome, but you actually get to like see them really kind of like open up and like deal with their issues and stuff, and it's pretty awesome. So
yeah,
wow,
great,
man.
Yeah, I'm hoping other people like it. It's gotten some good reviews. I'm going to give a shout out to Joanna, who actually wrote a 10-page fanfic for it. So
nice.
This is the awesomest thing that ever happened to me.
That's super cool. Man, that mechanic sounds so. That's just a genius move. Having them interrogate each other inside each other's minds. That's so cool. Yeah, I normally would have a hat to tip to you. I tip my hat. That's awesome. Really, really good. Can't wait to play it. I'm super psyched. Yeah, that and Mark's by the book are like top of my list right now. Both of those, I gotta play those. If only I'd gone to New Mexico.
Oh, well, next time. Well, I will say I'm actually planning to visit some of the cons on your side of the country. Now that I'm within striking distance, there's a good chance I'll be showing up to go play, and maybe Big Bad. We'll see you next year.
Cool.
In the works.
Sweet. Then you can show us your game in person.
Yes. Although you guys might be able to see it before then. I don't know. Actually, what's really funny is I was actually designing a little bit. I don't know why this is. I have no idea. I love playing like a wide variety of games, but whenever I sit down to write mechanics, the very first pass is usually very board gamey. Like it's just really, really crunchy mechanically. It's very narrow, and so one of the last things that just happened is I actually used John's advice. I sat down and between the alpha and the beta, I rewrote it from scratch. I just wrote it from memory because what I run and what I was actually on the page are slightly off because you've run it enough that you've kind of built up stuff. So I rewrote everything, and we pushed it out. There was a small con back in Pittsburgh, and some of the people that had played in the alpha volunteered to run stuff. And when the feedback came back, what I realized is that I needed to pare things down. Like some things were over mechanized, and they just needed to be like cleaned up and made nicer. So I was actually thinking that I was going to be done like maybe 2-3 weeks ago, but I completely revised a couple of systems, and that's just taking a little while to get back into the text. So
Yeah, that's really cool. It's like you're sort of faking that thing where after a game comes out, people become really expert in it, and then develop more streamlined ways of running it than the original designer had, right? But you're sort of doing that prior to the release process, which is, I think, a really cool thing to do. So you sort of like develop expertise in your own game and then sort of rewrite it with that in mind, right? Which I think is a pretty cool step to take.
Yeah, Cam Banks just tweeted that yesterday. I think he said something like that the fans of the games he's made have every time made something cooler for his game than he did making it, which I think he was, in his classic Kiwi self-effacing way. I think he was trying to be kind of, mopey about it, but yeah, I think that's awesome, and I think he got all the responses that said that as much, and I think that's why, like, the stuff John Stavropoulos makes for the Marvel game, is amazing, and that's the reason why, right? Like, when you're working with a license and you have deadlines and you have all this stuff and you got to do it on someone else's schedule and budget and everything, like, you don't necessarily have the luxury that we do to design an entire game start to finish from scratch, put it on a shelf, wait 2 years, pull it off, play it, have a fan community in place that before it's released, all these things that are so amazing, that we kind of take for granted sometimes, I think. And yeah, that's probably the biggest benefit, is to become an expert in your own game, to make player handouts for a game that you've played a lot that hasn't come out yet is a really powerful.
Or even if somebody else makes them, that's nice too.
That's the best. That is the best.
You're like, hey, this is how you should run your game.
Yeah. Right. Like, actually, I didn't tell Josh this, but Rachel Walton is running Blades in the Dark right now, and she went on the forum, and I saw that she had posted and she said, "I'm running this tonight. Can someone give me GM advice?" And my first thought was like, well, I think I said what I needed to say in the text there. I don't know if I have anything else to add at this point. I know I have to write like a whole chapter on it, but whatever. I think it's close enough. And then I noticed that James Stewart and Strauss had responded to her, so I went and looked, and it was just like the GMing guide had been written in the forum post. So I went in and copied and pasted into the doc with stars around it, like, here it is. Here's how you run your game, idiot. So yeah, man.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm actually, one of the things I'm excited about that's hopefully coming up soon is Shreyas and I are going to rewrite Misdrobe Gate and try to do a more streamlined version of it.
Whoa!
I love the game so much, and I was in love with that game the first time I played it in Vincent's living room with 13 people, which was crazy, on Mars. And it's one of those things where I feel like the text has been really good, the rules are really good, but there's some aspects of it that are just difficult to wrap your head around if you're not used to it, especially the night ritual and some aspects of how that engages with the fight mechanics.
Yep.
So I think one of the things we're going to do is, and I think it's going to be really helpful to have both of us sit down, and I can be like, hey, Shreyas, this is how I think your game needs to be run, and he could be like, actually, no, this part is really crucial or whatever. So it's nice to have a sort of back and forth where we can both kind of pitch a sort of fresh outline to each other, because we both play the game a lot and have a deep feelings about it, right? So I'm excited to hopefully get to that sometime in the next few months. But yeah, I think that's really awesome if you can get somebody externally, or if you can forget about it for 2 months or 2 years or however long it is, and then come back to it. Sometimes that freshness does really help if you can afford to do it.
While I refill my glass here, I will take this time to introduce the whiskey of the evening. This week, it is the Barreled Boulevardier from High West. they make this cocktail and then barrel it in one of their whiskey barrels for a while to age it a little bit. It's really good. Everything High West does is super great. They make this thing called Campfire, which is amazing. You should definitely try it. It's a little sweet for me, so I have a little backup bullet to bourbonize it again. It's my drink of choice tonight. What are you drinking, Jonathan?
I have one of the legendary Boston beers, Magic Hat Number 9, named after the Beatles song. It's a apricot pale ale. It's one of these weird beers that, like, locally in Boston is just totally normal. Everybody drinks apricot pale ale. I don't know why. Sort of like in Seattle, how there's like Mac and Jacks is like this thing that you can't get anywhere else, and it's only served in barrels, and it's this sort of unfiltered kind of pale ale, I guess is what it is. I don't know what to call Mac and Jacks. It's kind of... Is
it an amber? I don't know what it is.
Sort of a reddish, ambery thing. Who knows? It's delicious.
It's called an African amber, maybe.
Whatever that means. I think it's just called African because it has a lion on the bottle. But anyway, so Magic Hat Number 9 is this Boston beer. It's you can find it somewhat other places, I guess. I just found it in San Diego. I never saw it in Seattle ever. So I'm excited to be drinking beer from Boston that I have fond memories of.
Nice.
So I wasn't quite prepared. I didn't. Give me just 1 second. I didn't know that I was supposed to have a drink of choice here, but I'm gonna improvise. I'll tell you guys what I have. So 1 second.
Okay, cool.
No problem. We can vamp.
Strash isn't here to hear this, but I'll say this right now. While he was pitching Atlas Reckoning, I got a text from Allison. Strash, my girlfriend texted. She's watching this, and she texted me while you were talking about Atlas Reckoning to say that she wants to play the game, and so your pitch is working.
I need to. I was listening actually today to your guys' talk from last time, and I was listening to the elevator pitch method, so I have to work on mine a little bit. All right, so I am drinking tea because that's what I do all the time, forever. And actually, this tea is really interesting. I found it only here in Boulder for now. It's called Blue Spring. Oh, it's basically what's interesting about it is it's a little bit of a gimmick tea, but I've happened to find that it's like super awesome. They take actually tea leaves, and after they're dried up, and they actually cover them in a ginger kind of candy paste. And so when you make the tea, you can smell ginger like everywhere in the house. And after you drink it, anytime you inhale, it's like eating ginger candies. So.
Whoa. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's actually super delicious. So I'm a giant tea nerd. I do all the loose leafy stuff. So that's
So
fun.
do we have to go to Boulder to get that tea? Is there another way?
No, I will tell you what. I'm sure you can actually Google it. I think Kucha actually delivers. But yeah, I do different teas. This is an oolong, which is my favorite type. So.
Cool. So we're kind of at the halfway point, sorta. Well, maybe a little past. But I want to go and hit the Q&A real quick. We've got one. First question is, have we played the Boscombe RPG? I've never heard of it. Not aware of it. Supposedly it's very funny. It might be new. I'm not sure. I think the answer is no. We have not played that.
Nope.
You want to tell us more about it in the Q&A thread? And then Judd responded to the about designing. He said, yes, there is a funky skill of designing with space for gamers to design. Apocalypse World stuff does that really well. Do I have a question? I'm not sure, he says. Yeah, I agree. Apocalypse World does that extremely well by design, by very careful, long-suffering thinking. That game was made specifically to produce all the hacks and stuff that it did. It's interesting to think that it did that and Sunderland didn't. I wonder. Well, that's a long conversation to figure out exactly what's going on there, but
well, we could talk about it, but I don't know if they'll come up with any real answers.
Yeah.
I think some of it has to do with the design you have to do for Apocalypse World in some ways resembles the design people already do or are used to doing, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
Where the design for Sunderlands kind of asks maybe different things of designers.
I would argue that it's easier to do a Sunderland hack, but that doesn't mean it's more like appealing or
familiar.
Yeah, right.
I think what we need to see actually is exactly what we talked about at the beginning. There are two parts. Obviously, what Judd is talking about is 100% spot on. If you make a game that sort of like lends itself, like if you're not deeply integrated with your world and you have these like hugely interrelated systems that only exist in a specific balance, like I mean, like if you make a game that is intended to be used and sort of like divided into these little fragments that you can swap out and change, that's one thing. But there's two elements. The first one is, of course, this idea of permission, even though hacking games has always been a thing, always will be a thing, right? But the idea that you're invited by the author, yes, please come here. Here's some ideas on how to do this. But the other thing is that we didn't see the Apocalypse World hacks start to really take off in a big way. And what I mean by that is not like, oh, well, I hacked something and I put it on a forum and, it's a thing, it's legit, but sort of coming out and be like, let's kickstart this, let's get books out, let's get playbooks out, we didn't see that until somebody actually put out a couple. And so one of the things that I think Sunderlands is missing is that bootstrapping process, right? So like part of the reason why everybody is making an Apocalypse World hack is because so many have been made that people have learned sort of like the mechanism, and there's a big support network, right? So not only are you learning from like standing on the shoulders of giants, but you've also got a lot of people that will support you and give you ideas and playtest and things like that. So I think Sunderlands came out in this like really weird time period. I don't remember what was going on, but I know that Epi came out with Fast and Starlit, and then Sunderlands had this like hop, skip, delay, and it landed right in the middle of like 3 other games coming out. And I remember not getting a chance to run it because I was in the middle of like playtesting 3 things at once.
Yeah.
And then you lose the beat of a game, you don't always catch up to it again. So like usually it takes a weird conversation and then moving across the country to like reset your clock. But I think that if we saw 3 or 4 Sunderlands like conglomerations, right, like 3 or 4 of these games to connect and sort of show how it can be done, I think that process would initiate people starting to like follow suit and sort of do the same thing, thinking like, I could use this for X, and so.
Yeah, I agree. I hope it happens. It's an exciting thing. It's such a small little package, but every time I read it, it just fires me up. Yeah, I love it.
Yes, everybody, make games in pieces that people can hack.
Do we want to segue into a totally different topic? There were a couple that we talked about maybe talking about.
Yeah, sure.
One was Metaplot. I don't know how you want to dig into that exactly, but you were talking a little bit about sort of its relation to some of the stuff that you're thinking about or doing, and I have some thoughts from a different perspective.
Yeah, I know you have something new that's really interesting in that regard. It's something I've never been really involved in. I haven't played games that really use it. I always think of something like Exalted or even like Forgotten Realms or Vampire stuff, Metaplot stuff. As a GM, I never prepped that much. I never like bothered to keep track of. Or Tribe 8 is probably one of the best examples of Metaplot, right?
What about fronts?
Fronts? Yeah, no, I don't use those. Not because they're bad, because they don't fit my VM style. Well, I mean, I do use fronts. I don't prep them and I don't write them up the way that you're supposed to. But the way I think about Metaplot is always stuff that isn't what the people at the table created. It's the stuff that the game designers and the publishing team created that everyone playing the game is going to incorporate and potentially have like updates over time and have new revelations about stuff that you're going to incorporate into your thing. Do the Pathfinder, I think the Adventure Path stuff does that, right? Where they have NPCs that recur and they have like stories that resolve and stuff. I guess as a designer, my version of Metaplot is Lady Blackbird. Everyone uses the same stuff to make their stories out of, and it's the group did not create those characters or those places or those NPCs. I made all those up. So they're meta-plotty, I guess, in that perspective. But once gameplay starts, I always feel very I don't know, we don't need anybody to help us once we get going. We can just do whatever, and it's all good.
Well, and the Lady Blackbird stuff is almost more like having pre-gens and an adventure seed, right? Which is a kind of a different model than Metaplot, right?
Totally. And I get it. When people talk about Legend of the Five Rings and talk about, oh yeah, and then we met whoever, the Crab Clan guy, and everyone else goes, holy shit. And I don't know who they're talking about. I get it. I get why that's cool. You have this shared world that everyone's involved in, and that's a powerful thing. It just didn't ever suit the types of games we were playing, and the way that we interacted with those things just didn't suit a Metaplot.
Cool. Can we talk a little bit more about fronts and why you use them the way that you do, or you don't use them the way that you, or the way that they're explicitly written, maybe?
Yeah. What I love about fronts is it asks you a bunch of questions that are really important to understand, or to prompt you to run a post-apocalyptic kind of game. It says, what's their fundamental scarcity, what type of characters make it up, are they warlords, are they grotesques, are they this, are they that. Those lists and those questions are really awesome. They're the kind of stuff that if you follow that procedure, you will make a post-apocalypse that is slowly but surely eating itself and falling apart. And that's what you need in order to have Apocalypse World work. Because when I first started running Apocalypse World, I didn't totally understand that. I thought I could run it because it's exactly my GMing style that's in that book. I was very confident, and I was just like, okay, yeah, I got it. This is awesome. I'm glad someone wrote this down. I'm gonna run it, and I focused completely on the NPCs, and the NPCs and the structure of the game world around them was so secondary. It mattered, and there were some interesting NPCs that came out of it, and the games were fun. But Jonathan was in he was in the second iteration of the original series. All the consequences of that series were stuff you played in, and I don't know how you felt about it, but I'm going to guess that maybe it didn't necessarily feel like the post-apocalypse. It felt like some kind of insane, trippy, super powered battle thing or something. It was a post-apocalyptic game, but the world wasn't pressing in and dying around them. It was there was stability, and there were all kinds of crazy things that didn't make sense, but it was fairly stable.
Yeah, I think without fronts, the game becomes kind of it all revolves around the PCs in a kind of Primetime Adventures-y sort of way, right? Where there's not external stuff that's going to happen if the characters don't engage with it, right? And I think that's the thing that fronts gives you, is it gives you sort of off-screen planning, right? Which is why you have that make moves off-screen kind of instructions and stuff in the text, right? To sort of make sure that that the characters aren't in control kind of what happens by what they choose to engage with. That there's other stuff that's going to throw them a monkey wrench. Yeah, something like that.
And one element of that prep, and the reason I don't like to do that prep per se is I'm used to the sandboxy kind of approach where I have my various factions and my NPCs, and they have their wants and desires, and they don't care about the PCs, and they're doing their own stuff, blah blah. Yeah. But it was always in a existing world, a functional world.
Right.
And I didn't quite get the idea at first that those the way you do fronts in Apocalypse World creates a dysfunctional world that won't persist, that will destroy itself and fall apart, and is driven by cannibals and grotesques and stuff.
Yeah, it's different from running like an urban campaign or something,
Yes,
like an FPC
totally.
game.
Well,
You're like,
totally different in the specific. It's the same general.
it's the same general idea, but there's not like a status quo that various people are invested in upholding, and there's like forces that are arrayed against you, and that you're kind of often in urban campaigns, at least fantasy ones, you're sort of on the outskirts. You're thieves and murderers, sort of, and the world does not tolerate you. But it's in a very sort of top-down sort of way. It's not like everything's.
One way to look at it, actually. Now that you've said it that way, it's. I don't know if this is true, but the first thing I thought of was, in a D&D game, it's like the group of adventurers is a front, Apocalypse World front. They're a dangerous element that's going to fuck things up, and in Apocalypse World, the PCs can be that, or they can also be the people that are trying to actually hold things together and make things work out.
But everybody's a D&D murder hobo party trying to get you, right? Like,
yeah, kind of, with their insane priorities that don't match reality or civilization. But having said that, like, I feel like I learned that lesson about why they're structured that way and why he asked you to do the between first and second session homework the way he asks you to do it. And I think that's a very successful procedure.
Yeah.
That one ought to do, but I still don't do it.
It's okay, I don't do it either.
Or with Dungeon World. I don't use fronts in Dungeon World either.
I think
because it feels like I can't think of a good metaphor that isn't like really dopey. It's like putting this is a stupid way to put it, but bear with me. It's like putting the training wheels back on the bike, I guess, kind of. Like you've done it for so long without it that these are a totally different set of training wheel, not totally, but somewhat different. And when you put them on, you're going to learn to ride your bike a little differently. But it just feels weird to do it, and you just don't want to do it.
Yeah. It's like a little bit lazy, and a little bit you already know how to do this, and a little bit kind of annoyed at it, but also a little bit like you do kind of know how to do this, right?
Well,
so it's not like it's going to break the game if you don't do it, right?
Right. Now I know how to do it. If I just followed his fronts rules to begin with, I would have learned it faster. But now I do know how to do it, so now I'm not going to go through all the steps every time. Because I finally did learn the lesson. It would have been more expedient just to do it in the first place. But and I think that's common, like, to all gaming. You develop a shorthand, you get to the same place that you would have gotten to without necessarily hitting every single point on the process. But the process is there because not everyone's going to do that. Following the process is valuable, even if you're able to skip to the end. In fact, that reminds me, Rachel just ran Blades in the Dark and was kind enough to record it so I could watch her GM it. And there was a really great moment where she had to choose which of the moves they were making, the desperate gamble or the kind of risky move or the controlled maneuver type thing. And she just had a gut feeling. She's like, oh, I think it's this. I think it's the middle, the risky move. And then Sarah or someone said, oh, there's a list here. Like you can go through and check all the factors to add up to what the move is. And Rachel's like, oh, okay, let's do that. And then they did, and they stepped through and they asked the questions like, who has the advantage here? Who's this? What did I? And they went through the whole thing, and they ended up at a risky move. And there was this little joke where Rachel was kind of like, oh, well, like it was a little sort of this downbeat in the video where she was like, oh, that was kind of a waste of time. And I was like, oh, that's the best. That's the best thing ever. Like you had this gut feeling, and then the system confirmed, yes, you're doing it right. Like you're already there. Like you don't necessarily need to do those every time because you already have the right sense of where you are in the process.
Right. It's like setting obs and burning wheel, right? Like the first few times you want to explicitly follow the instructions. And then every so often it's good to do it if you feel a little bit uncertain, because you're like, this is kind of like this other situation, but I'm not sure, just to sort of make sure that you're on the same measure scale or whatever. But after a while you just do it, right? You're like, oh, that's a 3 or that's a 5 or whatever, right?
Yeah, and that's a great example, because Burning Wheel is so gentle. It's weird to say that because that game's so harsh, but it totally works both ways. Like, it doesn't break if you're playing mouse guard and you forget to look up your factors every time, and you just go ob 3, I guess. The game carries on. There's no horrible outcome if you do that. And if you look up the factors every time and you go, holy shit, that's actually ob 7 for this, like that. Wow, I didn't know that beekeeping even worked that way. Like, you get an interesting bit of information, but it was fine when you were blowing it and saying it was op 3 instead. It didn't. I really love that about the game, that it seems so like mechanical and precise and fitted, and it seems like that game should be brittle, but it's not. It's completely. It's very robust. It's hard to break it.
So to jump back to Metaplot briefly,
let's get back to the friggin' point.
The thing about the fronts that's really interesting is it lets you create your own metaplot based on what's already happened in the fiction, right? Which is like the way you're supposed to do it. You play the first session, you follow people around, you figure out what the deal is, and then you create your fronts, right? So your fronts aren't these things that the game designer created beforehand, right? They're these things that came out of the things you already said about the game, right? You were like, oh, there's this dude who's really scary, so I guess he's either a front or a threat. And then, like, is he working for anybody? Is he doing it by himself? What are his larger plans, right? It makes you ask these questions, and then it kind of makes you follow through with them in the fiction, is the idea, right? That you said this dude was really scary. Now you've made him really scary with your front, and then you have a clock, and whenever it moves down a step, he's going to do some really scary things, right? So that's the thing I think I like about it, is that it gives you a meta plot that you created yourself, and it makes you follow through with it. So the one idea that I sort of threw out on G+ and was sort of mentioned to John earlier was based on kind of something I've seen John do, actually. So like in some of John's sort of fantasy games, or games where you're playing as sort of a band of miscreants, I've seen him put index cards out on the table with different jobs or plots on them that the characters could pursue, right? Like, there's this thing you could investigate, there's this job you could take, what's up with this thing, maybe you want to go find out about it. And then at the beginning of the session, the group as a whole can decide which of these things do we want to do, or do we want to do something different that's like not on a card out here. But it's a sort of way of tracking major plot points. And it also is a reminder, I think, to John as a GM, if they haven't done something about a thing for a while, right, you can update it, right? Which is a little bit like some of the stuff that I do in Planar Codex, but a little bit different take on it. And so I was thinking about that, and I was like, why isn't there sort of like meta plot where the kind of events are sort of fixed, but your ability to engage with it is more sandboxy, right? Where you have like a stack of cards that are like, there's a heir to this kingdom, right? And the first one says, when you figure out who the heir is, flip the card, right? And you flip the card, and it's like, okay, well, whoever the heir is, it makes you make judgments about the fiction, right? Who's the heir? Okay, whatever his plot is, there's somebody out there who's trying to kill him, right? Figure out who that is, and then they try to do it, right? So it's like, it's still a thing where you read the fiction, and you're still making the meta plot based on the stuff that you've already said, but it sort of gives you that sort of permission, right, to do the things you said the game is about, right? And it works particularly well. I was thinking about this in terms of Anna's current Kickstarter project, right, which is this sort of JRPG setting. And in all of those JRPGs, you have these sort of meta plot, right? Somebody is the heir, and they're like building a super weapon, and the dimensions are collapsing together, right? You have all these sort of big meta plot things. But
Every time.
Go ahead.
No, I just said every time. It always is exactly that.
Yeah. There's always at least one or two of these huge plot things. But if you could engage with them voluntarily based on hitting fictional triggers, that'd be kind of cool. You could sort of have the sandbox and have your meta plot at the same time. and still feel like you were telling the story that you came here to tell, kind of.
I think there's an art to that, right? Like, um, it's there are certainly some games that actually not just. So the question here that I have is when you say metaplot, which there's you're talking about two separate things, and I'm curious which one you're sort of striving towards.
Mhm.
There's like metaplot in the sense that the backstory of the world that you're in is written, and Lady Blackbird is an example of a much briefer version of that. But like most of our trad games actually have these very huge with years and dates and names. And I'm thinking about Warhammer where I can name at least like, 2 dozen emperors and what they did and whatnot.
Right.
But at the same time, there's the other half of the meta plot, and this is the one that always confused me, which is the updates to the world that are, I guess, canonized by whichever group is writing the game. So like in Lady Blackbird, or even in any like generic D&D game, like if you're playing, FR or whatever, like you have this like history and that's the case, but then you start play and you change the world from that point on. Everything you do in your game is the only canon from there. But then
Right.
there's like, a lot of games that I've seen that like White Wolf did it in the old era, but I mean you see it in a number of other things where they actually put out updates, like Shadowrun. They put out, oh, this is what happened in the next 3 years, so this is like now the canon, and this is what it is.
Right.
So I'm curious. The first half, I think we can simulate, and we do simulate, and I'm not even 100% sure if it's super bad. Like a lot of times when I'm going to run Dungeon World, the first thing I do is I set things up, and I know a lot of people that do microscope first and then play a game or whatever.
Hmm.
But the second half is what's really interesting and where I get kind of confused because I'm not sure how you synchronize what's happening in the lives of the PCs, who are, of course, the reason you're playing the story, and sort of the world at large. And
Right.
as John was mentioning, in Apocalypse World, fronts, right, they intrude and they actually change the world, but I'm not sure how much you can do without damaging what story was made at the table, which is, the thing that's sacred about a game, really.
Right. Well, that's partially why I was trying to make it voluntary, right? Like, if you don't care about
Yeah.
the air plot, then you just don't pursue that one, right? You pursue the plots that you're interested in, and you engage with those themes. But it would be interesting to try it and play because you're right. There could be instances where you like flip a card and it says to do something that just doesn't make any sense with the stuff that you already have going on. So I think you either have to write them like kind of vague, which not they may not be useful then, right? If they're not giving you specific things to do. Um, so I don't know.
You need to be vague. I think you've hit on a solution that's really flexible and cool, where um, like with metaplot, like let's say White Wolf metaplot, or Shadowrun is a better example, really. Maybe um, it's so specific. Like between 2079 and 2080, like Dunkelzahn gets killed or whatever, and the ownership of the oil corporation or whatever that he ran is up for grabs, and yada yada yada. Um, that happened. That happened theoretically to everyone's Shadowrun campaigns, who cares about the meta plot, and that's it. Like it's just a directive. Like this occurred. But I think in your model, Jonathan, like if things are very specific, you get the best of both worlds. Like it is still a shared universe that everyone can talk about, but it's resistant to spoilers, which we always talk about as like a very good thing for sharing on the internet. You don't want your stuff to be spoilable. That makes it harder to talk about. But it's still a shared world, so we can say, oh, did you get the uncovered heir? Like, is he in your game? Like, it's a specific person,
Right.
and their assassin is a specific person. Like, that stuff wouldn't necessarily have to be vague. It could be really, really concrete.
Yeah.
Um,
But you still make judgments about how you implement it, right?
exactly. And maybe we haven't uncovered that in our game yet. And when we do, we're going to make enough judgments about it that the way you did it isn't going to ruin it for us. We're not going to be like, oh yeah, we already heard about that air thing. Like it's you ruined it. Now when it comes up in our game, we're gonna know everything. Like it's. I think you can really get the best of both worlds out of this kind of like modular meta plot concept. Is I don't know. I'm excited about it. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just sort of started thinking about it the last few days, so it's not like it's fully developed yet. But hopefully I'll get a chance to try it out.
Yeah, and it may, like, I don't know. It's making me think all kinds of crazy things about how you can, um, like, you have, yeah, in Apocalypse World you have the fronts questions.
Yeah.
These metaplot things they could be very specific, but the way you answer the questions could be the hook that um, makes it your own, or customizes it to your group or whatever.
Yeah, it could also sort of link plots to specific characters, right? Like if you have let's say you have a plot that's called like Lord of Corruption or something, right? And the first card says, who is the source of foulness and terrible things in your city or whatever, right? And then you pick who that is, right? And so you've already made a judgment about it. And then the subsequent cards then show how that foulness gets sort of played out, right? Um, I think there's ways in which you can sort of tag sort of external stimuli from the writer or from other game designers to the things that are already happening. At least I hope so. It seems like something that should be possible.
I have a thing to interject. Actually, it was something that I was tinkering with a long time ago. I made these things called keystones, and they're things that you kind of play out at the beginning of game, and people kind of align with them, and you can. One of the things that you're talking about is about dealing out extra cards, right? So I don't know if you want to like add new cards to the deck or not, like that only get triggered if specific events come up.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I did it was a little bit more AW-ish, which is that a specific card, like your Lord of Corruption, had specific moves, and then whenever they gathered tokens through whatever means, they would be able to expend them to create plots of a certain type. So one of the things that you might have is like, if you do the Warlord, they can expend tokens to like create armies on the horizon that then approach, then are screwing your day up. Or if you create, like the Font of Magic, it has specific things that it can do to change the world and change the rules. And so you can
Are you
kind of do
talking
them
about
as almost like, huh?
Are you talking about sort of as character-based, like PC-based add-ons, or are these sort of NPC things?
So they're actually NPCs, like or can be like a place or a person, I guess. So one of the things you can do is like you can deal out like 5 for your game, and then like there are specific things that will add another one or take away one. But in general, the PCs can tie themselves to it. So like if the PCs serve the Lord of Corruption, then by doing PC things and messing stuff up, they're giving him points that he then uses to change the meta plot, right? Or if they're fighting him, then they might be like taking points away from him. But the thing that I was working on had PCs that were tied to different things, so there was a little bit of like pointed interaction. It wasn't like a group of PCs who were like in a band. They were actually serving different angles, and so like the particular game that we played this with was actually kind of cool. It was a 1920s, but like with Woo. So it was like we set up Chicago, and Al Capone had ghosts on his side. There was like a crazy church front, and then there was a guy named the Jackal who was just messing everybody's day up. And so like the PCs were aligned with the different factions, and they would like change their alignment with it. Oh, and then the government hired the Untouchables to like come in and mess everything up. So anyway, the point is that each of these represented a specific thing. Like in our game, your Lord of Corruption would have been Capone, right? So same idea, but we just chose different things. And so like because he had the specific card, he was able to manufacture certain types of plots. And so by helping him out, he was gaining control of the city, but also generating plot in the city that was serving him. So
Yeah, it's cool. It's like a little bit like sort of having keys and secrets from T-Soy, but sort of tied to specific NPCs, right?
yeah, almost exactly like that. So
Cool. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's really cool. It's like you have the initial part where you make the judgment and decide who the thing is pointing at, but then you also get like a move kind of that tells you what to do next with that character.
And kind of a countdown.
And yeah.
yeah, actually, very much a countdown clock. And so, like, the stronger you were tied to anything, the more you could draw out of their pool. So, like, if you were serving Capone and you needed some goons to back you up, you could eat up a couple of his points, but then generate goons to back you up, and so on.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. That reminds me of the Infernal in Monster Hearts, like kind of like that great. It always feels so fun to play the Infernal because you're like, oh yeah, more strings, Dark Lord, but I get power now, so it's okay.
Yeah, that is as sort of like a core design statement, and then you just make these cards and I guess create different lords. I'm gonna put little quotey fingers for the Infernal. So.
Yeah. It's cool. It also reminds me a little bit of the faction game of Stars Without Number, right? Sort of like set up these different factions and have like a resource economy for what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Just as a slight tangent, that finally came up in the newer version of Razors that we're playing. There's a faction network that you kind of fill out, and you have different relationships with factions, kind of positive, neutral, negative. And they had worked very hard to get one of the factions up to the highest positive level, and that then it has been a good thing for several sessions to have this really good relationship. And in the last session, that faction came under some trouble, and I sort of put it out there, like they basically turned to the group and said, like, solve our problems for us. And the group was kind of like, wait a minute, what? Like, we have a good relationship. Like, we spent all this time getting a +3 with them, and now it's a problem for us. I thought the negative side of the spectrum was showing what was going to be a problem for us. I was like, you're their friend, right? I mean, isn't that what +3 means? Like, they're in trouble, so they need you. They need you to help them. And they're like, this sucks. Positive relationships the worst. Yeah, I don't know where they got the idea that there was anything on the faction sheet that was good for them. I don't know where they got that idea, but somehow they thought that.
Right. Clearly getting closer to a bunch of murderous assholes is what you want to do, right?
Yeah. Well, I love this idea, and I want to steal it immediately and start using it.
Well, you should.
Totally. That's what it's for.
Yeah, it's super cool. The double, like, combining what you guys, the two of you just said, is feeling really strong to me.
Yeah. I'm going to steal Strauss's countdown clocks and specials attached to
yeah.
question cards, too.
That's really why we're here. We just invited you to steal your ideas, Strauss.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. It's really...
You know the truth.
Imitation is the greatest form of flattery and all that. I'm very much all about the open source movement. So if we're randomly designing games on air and people want to take stuff, I'm definitely all for it.
You weren't helping me design my game enough. I needed more.
Now I'm going to help you design yet more projects that you're going to have to get to eventually.
Yeah, boy, that's the truth.
Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, speaking of that, Jonathan, you mentioned this before we started recording. This idea about what do you do? How might you feel? Not should. When you're working on a project and someone else comes along and does it too, or possibly better, or possibly to completion way before you, or all those various options. Basically, all the fears that people express when you say, hey, you should just share your ideas on the internet and don't worry so much about sharing stuff. And people always say, someone's going to steal my idea, someone's going to do it better, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, well, in my experience, people never steal your ideas. It's always that they were working on something kind of similar at the same time, and that you're both coming out with like a alpha or beta or final version at the same time, right? Which is a slightly different problem because you've sort of already both invested a lot of time in this thing, right? And then how do you feel about it? What do you do about it? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think before we started recording, my knee-jerk reaction at first said, oh, well, we're on the same page about this. And then I was like, we've never talked about this before, I don't think. So we'll find out if we are or not.
Tell me what you think first.
Well, so my public-facing persona, my brand would say, that's the best thing. If I've been struggling to make my dream game about vigilantes for 7 years, and then someone comes along and does a really awesome version of it, that's the best outcome. Clearly, I can't figure it out, or having trouble figuring it out, and what I want is to play the game. That's why I'm designing it, is so I can play it. So if someone else makes it, and it's playable now and ready to go and it's good, that there's nothing better than that. Like, because what I want the most is to play the game, and that's a true statement.
Right. Like whether you made it or not, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
As a mission statement, that's a true thing, and with no exceptions, no caveats to that. Like, game design to me is all about play, and if someone else does it and I get to play it, that's a good universe to live in. But as a human being with feelings, it sucks when that happens. It feels shitty when that happens, and I think that's something we don't talk about all the time. Often, what I've said online is like, "Don't worry about it. It's cool. Just move on to your next project." You know, they did it better, or they did it first, whatever. Either your thing is better, so keep working on it, or theirs, you love it, and just play theirs. But there is that sense of like, man, I wanted to be the guy to make the cool vigilante game. That was my thing, you know. I get that, but I think that's something to acknowledge, grieve if you need to grieve, and move on. Either continue working on your project because that's what you believe in, or move on to the next thing. But it is important to acknowledge that feeling. It's not like we don't feel that, or I don't feel that. I totally feel that. I do want everyone to be like, "Ooh, that's so neat. I love the thing you made." Like, that feels good when people say that. But if that's the only reason you're doing it, that's where the problem lies, I think. If you can find another reason, something exterior to that emotion, like I want to sit down and play a cool vigilante game. Maybe this has something to do with intrinsic reward psychology stuff. I don't know, but if you have something that's bigger than just I want everyone to say I'm cool, that's where it breaks for me. Like, it does feel bad, but it's not the only reason I'm doing it. So it's survivable. You can move on from it, and you can do whatever you're going to do next.
Cool. Can I give a concrete example?
Yes.
So today I came across Jason Morningstar actually posted these cards from this game that Derek Gore is working on called Hope in Humanity, which is this really, really awesome card-based post-apocalyptic survival RPG. And it made me think about Restless a lot, right? They have a lot of really interesting similarities, but they're also really different. His game is not about being hunted, but you are a group of people traveling from place to place in a sort of apocalyptic wasteland, and you're looking for supplies, and you're having to deal with hard choices. And his is more mechanical than the freeform game that I made. So you have pools of resources for individual characters, and you also have a pool for the group that represents their sort of overall morale. And then when you come across challenges, you have to decide whether you're going to spend your resources or the group's resources, or if you want to avoid the challenge, you can just take the consequences directly. So there's lots of interesting stuff going on there. And it's sort of got more sort of mechanical teeth to it. But it's dealing with a lot of the same themes. And the first thing that when I saw the game, I was just like, shit. Like, it's like, if I knew that game existed, I would have designed Restless around sort of different themes. Like, it would have been similar. It would have had the same card-based structure, and it would have done similar stuff. But it wouldn't have been a group of people trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. And it's not because I think the games are too similar, but it's that there aren't that many games in this sort of card-based pick-up-and-play RPG space, right? There's like Quiet Year and Carolina Death Crawl or whatever. But I don't want the audience to be confused, right? When they're like, oh, we're playing that card-based RPG where you're doing like post-apocalyptic wasteland. And people would be like, oh, you mean like that game Restless? And I'm like, no, I mean the game Hope in Humanity. so I'm trying to decide at this point, sort of. I mean, I like Restless. Hope Humanity looks awesome, and I'm really really excited about it. And
Yeah.
it does really different things. But it makes me wonder, should I like recolor Restless to be sort of more Event Horizon, weird space horror? Like, should I like give it a different feel? And this is more about sort of marketing and audience and wanting to like, uh, you know, uh, have a thing that when people say, oh, that game where you do that thing, and it's my game, right? Um, so I don't know. I don't know. That's just sort of the feelings I was working through today as I was getting over my sense of being crushed. Uh,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It might be too soon to know. I mean, both games are still kind of in flux a little bit.
yep.
They're not totally finished. That game. It's funny that you said, because I looked at that game today when Jason posted that, and
Mhm.
I did not immediately think, oh my God, this is Restless. It didn't cross my mind.
Well,
But
obviously,
you're
I'm
right.
more sensitive having just designed the game. So
Yeah, but I mean, once you say it, like it's obvious to me now that you've said it. I don't think you're wrong, but it didn't occur to me at the time. I don't know. That is an interesting point. Like, if they're coming out around the same time, that kind of differentiation is more important, I think. Um, there's a game called Cosmic Patrol. Have you seen Cosmic Patrol?
yeah.
Yes.
That's a great example.
Um, I love Flash Gordon. I'm not the only person who loves Flash Gordon who makes role-playing games. What a shock.
Yeah.
Uh, Danger Patrol has been around for almost 20 years now, and um, but it's still really obscure. And Cosmic Patrol came out, and it was during the release. The guy doing it sent me an email that he was like, "Oh no, I just discovered your thing. Like I had no idea it existed, and like we use the same fonts and everything. Like I didn't even know. I didn't know. I'm sorry." Um, but to his great credit, he didn't say, "I'm changing everything," and oh God, I have to change my game. He was like, "Sorry," and he released his game, which is what he should have done.
Right.
I don't think he even needed to say sorry, honestly, but it's nice that he acknowledged the similarities. But there's a huge gulf of time there. Like Danger Patrol had been out forever, and his game was coming out, many, 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 many years later, and nobody gets those games confused, or if they do, it doesn't matter or whatever. But two nascent stage games that use kind of free-forming card resolution about zombies, like that, I don't know. That might be an issue. That might be something to change. I don't know.
We
Yeah.
actually ran into that with Atlas Reckoning just like a month or two ago. There is another military sci-fi giant robot pilot style apocalypse world hack coming out called Souls of Steel, and we even have right. And so like Dana Fried's thing, and so we even have like their playbooks have some of the names as our archetypes. So like you'll see like the veteran, the hotshot, and so on. And
Mhm.
so yeah,
But you're also in the
so
stage.
right. And so actually, it's really funny because I'm partnered for Atlas Reckoning. I'm partnered with an Italian guy named Giacomo, and he woke me up at like 6:30 in the morning with this like sequence of panic chats. Like my phone sounded like some sort of machine gun was hitting it. I was like, "Listen, it's gonna be totally cool. Don't worry about it. We'll just do our thing. It's sufficiently different. We use cards. It's not super exactly the same." And we actually just it was super cool. Like we started G plus post about it, and we had a little chat, and everything's cool. We'll both do our thing, and people can play whatever, and you know. But I
Yeah.
see exactly. I know exactly what you mean about that moment of like, well, I dumped like 200 hours into this. Should I, you know?
Yeah, totally. Blades in the Dark and Project Dark are another example of that, which they're totally different as games, but from a marketing angle, it's hard. It's a challenge to distinguish yourself.
They're thieves. There's the word dark in the title.
Yeah, yeah. What do you do? And the other part of this we haven't really said yet is the opportunity side. not just the problem side, but there is a potential good opportunity to gain a lot more attention to your product that you didn't have. Like everyone who's interested in Souls of Steel, like may find out about Atlas Reckoning now because of this overlap, and your audience has a potential. It won't necessarily happen, but it has a potential to grow because everyone who thought the idea of robots fighting kaiju Pacific Rim style as an RPG, everyone who thought that was cool,
which is like
probably going to think your game is cool too. And there is a little bit of a like, not everyone is going to buy both of them. You're going to have a customer issue at some point, but not necessarily. Like our most of our audience is pretty disposable income, luxury good, types. Like they're probably going to get both of them when it comes down to it. A lot of people will anyway.
Or over time.
Me too. Right? I already have Bliss Stage, right? But
right.
That doesn't mean I'm not getting Atlas Reckoning. I'm definitely getting Atlas Reckoning. It sounds amazing. So yeah, having more of those. I don't know. It's like how many OD&D clones do I have on my computer right now? Like 50 or something. So yeah, I can see the problem side, but I can also see the opportunity side, even as far as like stuff. Oh man, who did that? I'm blanking on it now, but somebody did. Sorry?
Cross promotion?
Yeah, cross promotion to the tune of even like a stretch goal on your Kickstarter is that you have an Atlas Reckoning playbook that's the guy from Souls of Steel or what or whatever. Like that kind of stuff is totally doable. We're too small a community to be that fractured, I think. Having said that, like it's like you said, it still sucks. It still feels bad when it happens. It's just not the end of the world, I think.
It's definitely one of those things too, where you're like you say, like how many fantasy games do people own that basically do the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's something to be said for being part of a discussion that's happening about a genre.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. We got a question. Nathan Roberts said we were talking about the moment when you discover that you're working with someone else and in the same space as someone else, and he says, but then folks hang on to their bad designs because, hey, it's mine and it's got to be better than everything else out there. There's a lot in this comment, I think, that's pretty interesting. Especially the bad is in all caps.
Yeah, there's definitely a thing where if you put a lot of time into something, it can be harder to let it go, right? And I think you see it a lot of times with either first-time designers or people who have like a white whale project that's like they've been working on for 10 years, or it was like their home campaign that they played for 15 years, and they're turning it into a game finally. And it's this thing where it's this burden that they bear, right? And sort of no matter what happens, no matter if playing the game is fun or not, or whatever, they have to do this thing, right? And sometimes they have to do it as a 300-page hardcover full-color book because that's the dream they always had, right?
That's where the problem lies. Because I was just about to say those games should be released. Those games should exist.
Yeah.
Quality is not a deciding factor on what game should be finished.
No. Sometimes you have to do a thing, right? Like that's just human beings. Sometimes you have to do it.
Absolutely. And if you think that there's some sort of like quality police judging what ought to exist, that doesn't exist. It shouldn't exist. I hope it doesn't exist. I don't want that to be true. I want to release whatever stuff I want. I don't want it to have to meet some kind of standard outside of myself. I want my own standards to be very high, but at the same time, you know what I mean. When you cross into the threshold of mortgaging your house, that's where you have problems. But to Nathan's specific question, I would say that folks hanging on to their bad designs. I hope they do. I hope that continues. I hope people feel the freedom to make the game they want to make and release the game that they made, and not be ashamed of it, and not feel like they should throw it away because it's bad or whatever, like do it. Write your screenplay. Put it out there. Yeah, I want more games, and by having more games, we'll have more good games.
I think there's a thing too though where you're like, if working on the game is making you actively unhappy for a long period of time, right? If it's not a healthy thing for you, that's like a kind of a different thing, right? Like if it's making you happy and it's a terrible, terrible game, by all means keep doing it, right? Like it's the thing that you're here to do, and you're going to feel good when you finish it, right? But if it's become this thing where you feel bad about it, you feel guilty all the time that it's not done, or you like it's not giving you any joy or excitement, and it hasn't for a while. I think that's the time when you drop a project or put it aside for 6 months to 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, whatever it is, and come back to it when you're maybe never or whenever you're in a real better place about it. Does that make sense as an add-on? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Josh.
Sometimes you have to make a judgment call, though. There have been times when, exactly like John said at the beginning, though, sometimes you see that game and it does the thing that you've been working on. It does it so perfectly that you're just like, well, I'll just play that. So.
I think that's a good place to be. I mean, I think as a life philosophy, holding on lightly is a really good idea. Feel everything deeply, care a lot, and walk away without looking back whenever you need to. And it applies to all kinds of things in life, but as creatives, I feel like it's super important, and especially if you're in the business. This part of this conversation, like none of us are professional role-playing game designers, I would say. Like we do it because we love it, even if we're making money doing it. It's not our livelihood per se, but as a creative professional outside of gaming, I think that's been probably the biggest benefit to me as a creator and as a professional, to care deeply about the project I'm on, even if it's making banners for a Microsoft event, and at the same time not care about it at all and be completely okay when they say, nope, we're changing everything about it. The whole event's been canceled, we're moving it to this other thing, we have a different design direction. Like, okay, great, fine. Start over, go, and you still feel the pain, but you just feel it like just for a second, and then you move on to the next thing. And maybe it's a combination of getting older and experience, and when you first start out, those pains are fresh and they're new, and they're the first time you abandon a project of any kind, whether it's your novel or your poems or your role-playing game, it hurts. And maybe it's just a factor of doing it 1,000 times, where you're finally like, yeah, whatever. I throw away 100 game designs a day. That's nothing to me. I don't know. I don't know if it's temperament or experience, or maybe it's a combination of the two.
It sounds like a combination. I think for me, the big choice is not to hang on to everything lightly, but sort of decide where you're going to make a stand, right? Like which of these things is worth hanging on to and keeping around and sticking to until you get it done, and which ones aren't, right? And I think when I was younger as a designer, I thought that every single design I had was worth keeping and finishing, right? And that's just impossible, right? Like I come up with like 50 new game ideas a year, right? There's no way I'm ever going to finish all of those, right? But sort of deciding which ones are the ones that you're going to keep working on, and which ones are the sort of like make a couple blog posts about it and then don't think about it too much, right? I think for me that's selection process, which I feel like I've gotten better at. It's not that I care less or hold on less tightly, but I've sort of have sort of different mental spaces where I keep the things that are really important that I care about versus the more ephemeral things that sort of come and go.
For me, I don't know 100% if this is super healthy, but I think for me, a lot of times I'm fueled by the interest of others. So if I'm working on something and people are playing it, it fires me up and I keep working on it. So it's almost like externalizing that process. It's less about, because I think I'm in John's camp of care deeply about what you're working on. But if you have like 30 projects, you're like, but, ooh, but, ooh.
Yeah, that's me like all the time.
Yeah, right? Actually, that's why I playtest so much, because I'm just like, ooh. But yeah, I think what happens is I kind of defer that choice to some others. Because if I put like 5 games on the table, I'm like, all right, what's the interest here? And somebody points at one, then that's the one I work on. Because all of them are beautiful and all of them are snowflakes in their own way. But I kind of need some extra motivation, a little bit of that fuel to, keep me burning,
Yeah.
the late night oils or whatever.
Yeah, having an audience is a big deal. I mean, doing stuff for yourself is great. Doing stuff for other people is easier for sure. If you know people are going to play it afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, like the healthy aspect of that. I can't speak to. It's possible for it to go a bunch of different ways, but yeah, I think Vincent said this a long time ago, and I'm probably paraphrasing him, but that thing where you're driven by the interest of others is it can be unhealthy. I think there's an obvious way for that to be unhealthy, but it's also it's just marketing, right? Like you're marketing your product to your audience, and as a business person, even if we're being hobbyists, like the thing that tests better is not a bad thing to pursue. If you're excited about play, you want to generate a lot of games. You want people to play the game. You want to create a community of play around this product or whatever it is. The thing that sparks the most interest is it's not automatically unhealthy to let that be your guide. I think that's like I think what I'm paraphrasing is Vincent saying that playtesting is marketing. You can tell if your game is going to latch on or catch fire, not when you release it, but way back during playtesting. Sometimes when you pitch a game, if you doggedly pursue the thing that everyone is super bored by when you pitch it, that's on you. Like you made that decision. No one cared about this. Every time you pitched it, everyone rolled their eyes and walked away from it, and you kept making it anyway. So when you release it, it shouldn't be a surprise that no one cares that it's coming out. So if your priorities are finishing this thing and releasing it, you can ignore all that and release your game. But if your priorities are creating these communities of play, creating something that people are excited to participate in, and then yeah, I think it makes perfect sense to let that be your deciding factor and put a bunch of stuff out and see what catches fire and follow the threads of interest. That seems wise to me. I don't think that's necessarily bad.
Yeah. To build on what you're saying a little bit, one thing to remember too is it's like kind of a lot of work to maintain a community of play around your game, right? Like I do a really bad job of it. For example, for Planar Codex, like I have a G+ community that I post to like 4 times a year. If I had a forum, I would have no time to administer it, right? Like there's a reason that people like Evil Hat are really successful at the marketing side, and it's partially because they have the time and energy and personality for engaging with people constantly about their games and talking about them and helping people out with them and stuff. And Burning Wheel is the same thing, right? I mean, those guys are tireless in their wanting to help you figure out how to do the right kind of object for the thing that you want, right? It can be a lot of work to sort of be constantly marketing your game on top of your job, on top of designing your next game. I think this is something where a lot of people struggle with, right? Once you've released your game and you've become synonymous with your game, how do you maintain an interest and engage with your community and, do you want to become that guy that people want to sign their books, right? Like that's a hard transition for a lot of people, right? You know, it's tough.
It's a whole job. I think we talked about this last time. That as a indie person, there's a bunch of jobs that have to be done, or that could be done, and by default, you have to do them all by yourself, unless you reach out and somehow arrange for other people to take care of those things. And marketing isn't just promoting the link to your drive-through POD. That it starts so much before that, all the way down to, like, is your game about zombies or is it about Event Horizon stuff? Like, that's a marketing decision that you're making that's going to affect the whole rest of the life cycle of that game. And the exciting thing about the hobby we've chosen is, by default, we get to make all those decisions. One person makes all the decisions, or you know, a team or whatever it is. Like, the people making the thing make all those decisions as a unit. And man, it's exciting, but geez, it's not easy or fun necessarily or successful. But it's exciting, I think.
Yep.
One of the last art forms, I think, where that's really, really true. Like, every art form has gone through its kind of underground zine phase, and eventually gotten successful in some way and gotten monetized and corporatized. And
aren't we back to the beginning though in a lot of those places now with like indie music and
yeah, for sure. Those are coming back around. Music especially, I think. I feel like when it comes to stuff like Patreon, like, music has got that all figured out and it's just killing it. And we could follow their lessons a lot in that regard.
Yep. And comics too, actually.
Yeah, that's true. But we're the young kids on the block here. Like, we're barely 40 now at the most. I think something like that. So, yeah, if you want a real gritty, independent art form, like tabletop role playing games is a good place to be. What do you guys think about that as game designers? Like, that's how I think of you. I think of you as game designers.
I think what you're saying is actually really interesting, because the advice that you hear are from people that are, for whatever reason, already successful, and most of the advice that you pick up is actually less about sort of finding your path, and it's more about how to take the thing that you want to see and convince other people that they want to see it too. But your vision of marketing, where you're saying things like, okay, well, what if I change this thing? Will that, like, change my branding? And also, if I'm working on these 3 things, this one's more popular, maybe I should go with that. Like, that's not an angle that anybody ever tells you. You get that standard mantra of, like, follow your dreams, do the thing you believe in, which is fine and it's correct. And if you really do believe in something, you should do it. But I don't know, this is kind of fresh, new advice. I haven't heard this angle before. It's kind of cool.
Well, you have to remember that neither John or I really have the ambition. Well, John's a little different nowadays, but for a while we didn't really have the ambition of ever doing this professionally, right? Which kind of puts you in a different place. Like, if you're in the place where you eventually want to be the next Evil Hat, and then eventually you want to be the next Paizo, and eventually you want to be the next Wizards, that's kind of a different career path, right? There's sort of well-tread models there of the kinds of companies and kinds of things you have to do to get there, right? And indie is really different in that, even though John is now trying to do games more professionally, it's different, right? You don't have to want the same things. You don't have to produce products look anything like those guys release. You can make your crazy niche products and sell them to your Patreon audience if you want, right? It's a different world, right? Especially with crowdfunding, right? All you have to do is have people that care about what you're doing. You don't have to market it to the existing gaming audience. You don't have to release 300-page full-color hardbound books because that's the normal thing. You can do really whatever you want. There's really no limits, except time and money and having a community that cares about it. Like those are the big limits, right? And if you can figure out how to find a community, how to raise the money that you need, and how to get it distributed and that kind of stuff, right? Like you can do whatever, right? And it's not that those limitations aren't real; those are very real, right? A lot of people, don't have the connections, or they don't have the time to put in all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, I struggle to find time every week to do game stuff, right? That's pretty normal. But there's not so much a formal or sort of business model limitation the way that we might have thought about in the past, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it even kind of wraps around to a point where you can do the 300-page full-color hardcover if you want, like Feng Shui 2, making $250,000 or whatever it ended up at. It was something around that mark on its $8,000 goal.
Right. Or even Johnstone making his 600-page class warfare supplement, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If he did it by himself and didn't kickstart and just did it, right? He wrote 600 pages of Dungeon World content.
And it's awesome.
It's super good, man. That thing is just... That guy he's a genius. He's one of the best. That thing is so good. I can't stand how good it is. But something Strauss said really resonated with me, and it's this thought that it's when you decide that doing this thing creatively is what you're gonna do. Ideas are not as important as we often think they are. That before you go into it, you think, I have an idea for this thing, and therefore that idea sort of deserves to be completed, to have an audience, to be released, or whatever. You have this naive expectation that ideas are important, that they're sort of paramount. And the more you do it, you realize that ideas are a dime a dozen. Everyone has ideas. Ideas are nothing. Ideas are meaningless. Genius is different. True genius is a different thing. You see something in a way that no one's ever seen before, and that's what people kind of want ideas to be. But execution is what really matters, and I think that very strongly sells what you were saying before, Strauss, that you have 5 ideas, but execution is what matters. So look at, playtest group, look at these 5 ideas. Where should my execution time budget go? Because anything can be turned into something good through creative, polished, experienced execution. You can turn, all of the film industry lives on this thing, right? That ideas are nothing when you're making movies. Every movie has been made, but it all comes down to execution. There's 1,000 million billion trillion ways to make a movie. This gaming is still young enough that new fresh ideas seem appealing, but I think, like Jonathan said, you have 50 ideas for games a year, and anyone out there who has their one thing, their one and only game idea that they must finish and they must release, and this is me, this is my thing, I am this one idea. You should do it, but you're not a game designer. That's not your path in life. You have one idea that you should execute and finish, but being a creative, being a designer means just being flooded with ideas, and it's hard to choose which ones to do. And the process of selection, the process of editing, throwing out things that aren't going to work, choosing where to put your time, all that stuff that's where the work comes in. Ideas are not that valuable. It's painful to hear that, but I needed to hear it at some point, and I think everyone needs to hear that if you're gonna do this as an ongoing thing, um, your idea notebooks are just gonna you're just gonna fill them up. You're gonna constantly fill them by the dozens.
I have a Google Drive folder, but and it's already starting to be to the point where I have to scroll down to go through all of the
Yes.
ideas, the quick notes that I made. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting. I used to catalog all my game concepts on my blog, right? I had all different categories for each one, so you'd have all the posts about the same idea with a kind of drop-down menu. But since we moved to G Plus now, I have to freaking remember all the ideas that I had, right? Go back
That's
through
the
and
thing, like the search is super good on G Plus,
but you have to know what you're looking for, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
like it's hard to tag stuff. I do miss your blog. I miss a lot of people's blogs for that reason. But I don't know if I want to go back. I'm not saying that, but
In some ways, sometimes it's good. I sometimes feel like if it's an idea that I don't remember, I probably wasn't going to finish it. At least it makes me feel better.
yeah. Well, it'll still come back around later. There just won't be evidence when you actually use it in something.
Right.
Yeah. I feel for me this thing we're doing right now is something we should acknowledge probably. It's not just working alone, presenting something to a group, gauging their interest. That's super important. That's all part of the process. But having this level of community and communication that's exterior to play, that's cooperative, supportive designer space where we can talk to each other and be free with our ideas and trust each other and say whatever is on our mind and not feel judged, and all those things that we're doing in this chat is a huge component to any creative process, not just making role-playing games, but we are extremely blessed to have this opportunity to do that kind of thing. And yeah.
And I think one thing that's especially good about it is it's important to find people who want to support you in making the things that you want to make rather than telling you how to do the things, right? You want people to invest sort of in you and helping you figure things out, right? And sometimes it can take a while to find those people, right?
And finding there's a certain amount of tension there too, where like our temperaments are different. I think, Jonathan, but as designers, we're not working in the same spaces per se, but we're on the same page theoretically.
Yeah.
But our temperaments are somewhat different as people, and it took a while, but I think we did manage to find a place, meeting face to face as much as we did, where I felt very comfortable being able to say to you, like, in the very vulnerable early stages of an idea, to just say, like, I don't like that. That sounds dumb. Don't do that. That's stupid. Because I trust you as a designer. Like I know that you know better than I do, probably. And when I say that's stupid, don't do that, I don't worry that you're going to throw it away and listen to me. Because I know that we're peers, like, and
that's definitely tough too. And part of it comes from like having met at Gen Con in 2006 or whatever, right? And having a history where we can say, yeah, I mean, like, if you tell me to do a thing, I'm not necessarily going to do it, right? And I know that if I'm like, that idea sucks, that if you really believe in it, that you'll tell me why it doesn't suck and like why you're going to do it anyway, right? And having that kind of relationship is definitely important too. I mean, you can tell me that you don't like some of my games and I don't get offended, right? I think that's a good place.
Right. Yeah. I think that's really important.
But it is tough. I mean, it's tough taking that criticism too, especially from people you respect. Sometimes it's tough, like, like if somebody was to walk in and be like, "This game is trash," right? It's hard to be okay with them, people that you really respect, saying that, and maybe actually really believing it, right? But it's a good place to get to. I'm glad I'm at that place. I was definitely not at that place for a long time.
Absolutely. It's a very good place to get to. It's hard. It's hard to hear, and then it's also hard to solicit sometimes.
Yeah.
You can get to a point where I think this happened on story games like annually for a while. The idea of criticism and the new honesty was a thing for a while, and that was always a challenge. Like Ryan Macklin always was a real champion for. Let's just have it out. Let's just really say what we think about everything. Like, let's not.
Well, we don't want to totally blame Ryan here. He has slightly more complex views, but he
Right.
was
Well,
pro.
and that was what I was going to say next. That was a lie. It wasn't true. Like the telling the truth was hurtful, and people didn't really want to hear that. So the intention was true, but the execution was not what everybody wanted, and it was just this complicated. Sorry, Ryan, I don't mean to say you were lying. You weren't lying, but it wasn't as simple as we thought it was. It was complicated, and so we should appreciate the cases where it isn't complicated and we're able to have those interactions that are very direct, very honest, and
Yeah, part of it's clearly a status thing, right? I mean, that's part of where it gets complicated, right? If I have authority and I'm saying, oh, Strauss's new game is terrible, right? People might actually care what I think, right? Which is stupid because I'm just some dude, right? But there are questions of power there that you can't really avoid, right? And so in instances where, I can say, hey, John, this new game you're working on, I have these questions about this part. This doesn't really seem to make sense to me, whatever. And there's no egos involved, and you're not going to, we've already worked out whatever the ego issues there are, right? That makes it easier, right?
It's a hard. I think actually that's possibly the core skill of being a designer is having that vision and being able to focus your kind of view, and being able to open yourself enough that you can consider like opinions given to you, but not open yourself enough that you just take all the opinions as like doctrine or fact. And and yes, power dynamics change everything and make everything a lot harder to equate there. But yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head completely. That skill is a subtle skill. It takes development. Like a lot of things, some people are more naturally inclined toward it, but it's something that I think any creative, if you write poetry or write novels or whatever, like having that skill is super important. You have to judge what feedback to keep and what to throw away and what to always question forever and never resolve. It in some ways it's the key skill of a creative, because the real work happens in the editing. So what you choose to keep in terms of feedback is what the product turns out to be. So that skill is really, it couldn't be more important.
Yeah, that was a really key comment. I like the idea that like you take the criticism and out of it you build your product. That's
kind of. Yeah, I mean, and that includes none at all, right? Like if you decide like I'm right, everyone's wrong, this is what it should be, like that's a choice. You have to decide to do that in the face of all the criticism you've received. Yeah, it's tricky, really tricky. Experience helps a lot, though. The more you do it, the better it gets, for sure. If you only ever do it once, it's gonna be the painful first time, and that's the only time. That's the only experience of it you'll have. The first time is the most painful, but the more you do it, I think all creatives can benefit from putting themselves in an environment where that's going to happen more often. If you're able to do that, if you're able, like this right now, like if you're able to create some kind of environment where you're constantly having these discussions and constantly feeling that judgment, I guess, is what it is. Like, you say something and I think, really, do I really agree with that? Do I really think that? Like, exercising your judgment is like a muscle, I guess. You just get better at it. And
it's interesting. I feel like the behavior I remember the most from our conversations is one of us looking at the ceiling and holding our chin, because that's how you knew we were having a good discussion, right? That somebody would say something and somebody would be like, I'm not sure I agree with that, right? And then we would inevitably have a really good discussion, right? Because usually it was something either somebody said that they hadn't really considered, or it was an actual real point of difference in perspective, right? Which is an opportunity to learn, right? As much as anything.
Having an instinct, this is something that came up a long time ago when I first started working at an agency, like a bunch of creative people all trying to do a project together. Something that came up in one of our brainstorming sessions was anytime someone says these two words, you're either about to have a really productive discussion or you're on the very wrong track and you need to stop. And the two words are, wait, what? And when someone says those words, that's the cue for everyone to pay very close attention. Like, either someone has just broken out into something really interesting that you really need to discuss, or you're just doomed. Like, this path is insane.
Right.
So
when you've left someone behind, it's a sign that they're either in a better place or you're in the wrong place.
Yes. And developing that instinct for, we're talking about judging feedback as an important skill, which is totally true. And another one is recognizing in yourself when you have a knee-jerk reaction. Yeah. I think that's what you're talking about, Jonathan, where you say something and I'm just about to have my knee-jerk reaction to what you just said, but the little skill set that I've developed inside me goes, whoa, wait, you're about to have a knee-jerk reaction. Don't do that. Think about what he said instead. And so you're about to say, like, what are you, an idiot? And this voice in your mind goes, wait. You need to think about this. Look at the ceiling. Think. Question your assumptions right now. Don't go to that first thing you're about to say. He just said something that challenges your assumptions. So instead of regurgitating your assumptions, question them right now. Here's your opportunity to reassess the thing you're like normal, sweeping aside of that. Like, that's stupid. That will never work.
It's a good general life skill for listening to people, for sure.
Yeah, right. Like, but like Strauss said, like, it's a skill. Like, it's a fine line of constantly questioning your own assumptions versus occasionally doing it, and how you navigate that is subtle.
Right, because you can't totally change everything you think about something from a single experience, right? The way you change and grow as a person is generally gradual, right? Sometimes it's even people shock you and you're super uncomfortable and you tweak things a little bit, but at least it has you thinking about it, right? And then maybe over time you move in a different direction, or you don't. You're like, oh, that's totally crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You said, Strauss, it was like the tension between like being bulletproof and being receptive. Was that what you were saying?
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah, it's pretty close to it. I mean, it's a lot of times I've seen people who elicit feedback, and then they either take everything in and change everything according to whatever the feedback was, and then there's the other skill, or not so much skill, but there's the you tell them, like, well, consider these following things, and they're just like, no, I don't want to listen to feedback because what I made is like a thing that I really believe in, and it's definitely good the way that it is. Because sometimes like it is exactly a skill. Sometimes people totally see something that you didn't see, but sometimes people aren't seeing what you're giving, or at least you're not explicitly telling them what what you're talking about, and sometimes it just works, but they don't understand why. There's that very famous article from the people that made oh poop, now my brain's not working. The one that you're making Kiha about, the shoot and loot one, the video game. The people that made that one.
Borderlands, yeah.
Borderlands, yes.
Yeah.
Very famous. There's a very famous interview with the people at Gearbox.
Oh, yes.
About feedback.
Yes. So good. So good.
Highly recommend looking it up. Just how they talk about how the emotional reaction that people have is almost 100% correct, but the advice they give you is not always. And so, like, how they show how some of the things, by changing things that weren't suggested, solved all the problems, and also how sometimes, people are like, well, we totally want this thing, and they're like, nope, working as intended.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time, actually. I think
everybody wanted
rate of fire or something, right?
Yeah, sorry, Jonathan. Everybody wanted the character to run faster.
Right.
When you sprinted in Borderlands, and they had tuned it just right so your movement speed was perfect for the game, but everybody wanted them to run faster. So they changed the way the textures looked when you ran on the ground, so they look like you're going faster than you are. And your movement speed, the sprint speed was the same, but it feels like you're running faster. The time, because they needed the load in, right? When you're running, like, you have to load the world faster, and there was a limit to how fast they could do that. They couldn't actually, and they could a little bit, but they didn't want to tweak that too much. So the experience was better, but the actual run speed was the same. Super, super important.
Good stuff.
Cool. Do you want to wrap it? It's getting kind of late.
No, I want to keep going for like 3 more hours.
We'll just have to do it more often.
But that's just me. We should probably wrap it up. But yes, we will do it again soon. That would be a good thing.
Thanks for coming, Strauss. That was awesome.
Thanks for inviting me. It kind of came out of the blue, but it was a true delight today. So.
You're in the queue. You'll be invited in the future.
Fantastic.
My goal for this thing, mainly it exists because Jonathan and I can't get together at a bar and do this face-to-face anymore. But it also exists just for this reason, to include all these awesome people that we have in our community and have a chance to talk face-to-face and, to flip it around, like I was saying before, like this interaction is a huge benefit to game design and to your skills as a designer. But to flip that around, it's a totally selfish goal to, like, this is just fun. It just feels good to do this. So,
right. And it's partially why you do it too, right? It's great to have recognition from general audience people that you never heard of, but it's also nice to have your friends, sit around and talk about the thing that you made, right? Mm-hmm. That's good too.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next one. Good night.
Good night.